Running the anchor lap for us today is Daniel Franklin. Dan has been executive editor of The Economist magazine since 2006. That's a lifetime in the magazine world. Since 2003, he's edited the publication's annual The World In guide to trends and influences that will affect cultures, countries, and societies in the upcoming year. Here to share his insights with us is return guest Daniel Franklin.
Hello, it's a pleasure to be with you. I would have loved, of course, to have been physically present in Naples. I know what a great event this is. I've attended several times, but I'm delighted that we can do this remotely with the wonders of technology. What I'm going to do today is give you a sense of some of the most important things that I think it's worth focusing on for the coming year. For many years, I edited The Economist's annual look at the year ahead, The World In. The World In 2021, I was heavily involved in too. And what I'm going to present to you is 10 key trends to watch in 2021. Now, clearly, forecasting is a risky business, a lot can change. But I think these are broadly themes that are going to, I hope they're going to resonate with you and be important ones shaping the year ahead. So in the next 20 minutes or so, that's what I'll be running through. And if you're not interested by one particular trend, stay with me because there may be another one that does resonate with you. So the first trend is the pandemic and the fight for a vaccine. Clearly, the pandemic is going to continue to dominate all sorts of aspects of life in 2021. It's vital for the economy, it's vital for health, it's vital for the way that we all feel about the prospects for the future. And I think within that, how much success we have, every country has in rolling out the vaccine will be the most important thing in the year ahead that determines how we are all affected by this pandemic. Now, it's remarkable that we have a number of vaccines to spread at all. This has happened at amazing speed, but speed is going to be the crucial question. How quickly can country after country get vaccines? Who to prioritize? Who gets it first? Who will actually, how many will actually accept to have the vaccine? My guess is rather more than at first seemed likely, that there will be a sort of stampede to get the vaccine. But also, which countries will manage to do this successfully? And we've already seen in the early weeks and months of the vaccine rollout that there is great differentiation between countries, even between rich countries, at how quickly they're able to do this, how fast the logistics go, and who they prioritize, who they choose to give the inevitably limited supplies to in the first instance. And I think increasingly as the year evolves, what we're going to see is the question of how the less privileged parts of the world get access and how quickly they get access to the vaccine, because essentially, unless everybody in the world has the opportunity to do this, eventually, we haven't actually solved the problem. The pandemic can continue the virus can continue to circulate. And so the degree to which there is international collaboration to allow some of the poorer countries in the world, very, very heavily populated countries in many cases, to have access to, and on what terms, vaccine supplies, that's going to be critical. It also becomes a highly charged political question, both for the governments concerned, how quickly they are able to satisfy their own population's demand for protection, but also geopolitically, because as we've seen already, the vaccine is to some extent a political tool. So China, we've seen, use the pandemic for soft power to spread the word that it is both handling the pandemic effectively at home and able to help other countries. And the rich countries have also started to see that they have a responsibility to help other countries as well gain access. So I think the pandemic and the many questions that surround the rollout of the vaccine is going to be the sort of foundational issue for 2021. Now that also plays in very much to the second theme to watch, which is the economy, which will be fundamentally affected by the pandemic, and how confident people start to feel about returning to economic activity, including in areas that have been most affected. And we've seen already, say here, that the recovery will be unpredictable and uneven. Uneven in particular because there are certain sectors which simply can't get back to full blast again because they are particularly, they involve people gathering together, and that's that activity, for example, in the hospitality sector, has been suppressed. There's all sorts of ingenuity happening to get around those problems. This event is a case in point. Conferences have adapted, have gone online, but it's still not quite the same thing as getting back full blown to the world as it was before. And so I think we're going to see, particularly in the early months of the year, when the pandemic has been going through a revival, and we haven't yet got the vaccine rollout on a sufficient scale to make people confident that they can get out and about again, and there are still lockdowns in place in many countries, we're going to see economic activity repressed. But the further we go on into the year, into the spring and summer, there will be a certain return to normality and stronger growth. Uneven also in terms of how the economic impact has affected different countries around the world. Perhaps one of the most striking figures that we had in the World in 2021 publication was that the economic growth for China by the end of 2021 will probably be roughly where it would have been had the pandemic never existed at all. So just stop to think about that for a moment. It means that Chinese growth, although it slowed down, China was nevertheless achieved economic growth, unlike most other countries in the world in 2021. But it's also now racing away and growing quite strongly in 2021. And by the end of the year, it will be more or less where it was going to be anyway. Now, the rest of the rich world, for example, is not going to be in that happy situation. It's going to be into 2022, perhaps even beyond, before we get back even to the levels of economic activity that we had before the pandemic. So very uneven, depending on which part of the world you're in, very uneven depending on which sector of the economy you're in. Clearly, there are certain sectors that, for example, connected to the technology that enables remote working to happen that have been doing very well. Others where physical meeting, physical gatherings is much more important that are held back. So very uneven and unpredictable in that there can always be at any time setbacks depending on how the pandemic progresses. So I'm suggesting that things will gradually pick up, and perhaps into the middle and certainly in the second half of the year, we're going to have some quite vigorous growth. But that is vulnerable. That's vulnerable to the twists and turns of what happens with the progression of COVID-19 itself. And if we get new mutations that change the outlook, that could also adversely affect the economic prospects as well, of course, if things develop take a really nasty turn for the worse. So, third theme, who runs the world now? The crumbling of the post-war rules and the rules-based order. We've clearly had a changing of the guard in the United States. It's not the only country, though, where there's a changing of the guard. Germany, we're approaching the end of the Angela Merkel era after many, many years, an election towards the end of the year. She will stand down after that. So that's the most powerful country, the biggest economy in Europe. We have a new prime minister or new-ish prime minister in Japan after many years under Shinzo Abe. We therefore have to see, I think clearly the most important question is how quickly the international collaboration amongst Western allies, particularly under the Biden administration, gets back into the groove that it was in before, or something more approaching that, and in what ways it has adjusted to what is a changed world since the Obama administration was in power. A changed world, particularly because of China's growing role in all sorts of areas, but of course in the economy, and its increasing assertiveness in its region and beyond. So I think we're going to see a much greater effort at collaboration led by America. President Biden has made it a sort of leitmotif that America is back, that it also wants to work very closely with its allies. The allies, both in Europe and Asia, are delighted to have America back by and large, but also a bit wary, I think, in two respects. Wary because they have been hit hard once by the idea that America may abandon them. They can't take America for granted in the way that they had all too often done in the post-war years. So how sure can they be that you won't have another period in which those fundamental assumptions of alliances will be questioned? And secondly, wary in some cases, particularly parts of Asia, that is this new administration going to be softer in some ways on, for example, China and the assertiveness of China in its neighborhood than, say, the Obama administration was before President Trump came into office. I think President Trump has recalibrated things in relation to the challenge that China represents to the West and to Western values. But how tough and in what ways will the Biden administration work with its allies to resist the authoritarian tendencies of China and the growing assertiveness of China? So those, I think, are the big geopolitical questions that we face in 2021. We also have, in my part of the world, in Europe, the new situation of Britain fully out of the European Union. The transition period ended with the turn of the year, and Britain too is trying to find its place in the world as a country which stands apart from the European club that it was in for decades previously. It has to find a way of influencing or making its presence felt in the world without the leverage that used to come from being part of that European club. So that's an interesting thing to watch in the year ahead. Britain is in the interesting position too of being in the presidency, in the chair of the G7 group of rich countries, and also of chairing the climate conference, the COP26 conference that will be happening towards the end of the year in Glasgow. So there is an opportunity in 2021 for Britain to play a prominent role on the world stage. And one interesting thing to mention, I think, is that Boris Johnson, British Prime Minister, has invited India, South Korea, and Australia to come along to the G7 meeting. So there are the makings there of what is sometimes called a D10, a democratic 10, that will be more assertively perhaps upholding democratic values in the face of the rise of authoritarianism elsewhere, China, Russia, and others. And so another question about the post-war rules-based order in 2021. I think it's interesting, and this is my fourth theme, to look at how companies get caught up in these geopolitical tensions. So I've talked a little bit about the US-China tensions. I think we have now seen that the Chinese. Sorry, shall I start that again? Because I was thinking there was a beep in the background. I'm not quite sure where that came from, but
it's not a problem. Yeah, you can start from that. You can, yeah.
So I'll start from yeah. So my fourth theme is on increasing US-China tensions and how companies as well as countries get caught in the crossfire of what's sometimes been called a new kind of Cold War. So I've talked a bit about the questions over how the Biden administration handles China. I think it is now a bipartisan position that to recognize the seriousness of the challenge that China represents. To some extent, the West has become less naive about China, but there are still plenty of differences, I think, between Western allies about how exactly you deal with China, where you can cooperate, and where to confront, where to resist. And in particular, it comes up in the area of trade and investment, where many countries are very keen to still have the economic benefits of the relationship with China, and there can be a trade-off between those economic benefits and the security vulnerabilities as well. So that, I think, you're going to see in country after country, actually, the tug of war between the power of China, the attractiveness of the scale of its market, the importance of supply chains that run through China, but also the concerns about security worries, about dependence on China, and how far integration with China should go, particularly in key sectors, and the row over 5G telecoms and whether to allow a big Chinese player in this Huawei into your systems. That's sort of been emblematic of where this really becomes a very live and practical issue for country after country. But many countries, particularly around the region close to China, are caught in this dilemma of China is their biggest trading partner, America is their biggest, most important strategic ally. How do you try to avoid the tensions or manage the tensions between those two? And I think companies too find it very hard, will find it increasingly hard to escape this. They'll increasingly find themselves having to manage these tensions, making decisions about the extent to which they want their supply chains to be involved with China, and the extent to which questions of reputational risk in dealing with China in certain areas could affect them too. So corporate bosses are having to become, not just in this area, but in other areas too, more and more politically savvy. And this is my fifth theme, that it's not just on the geopolitics, it's also in areas such as social justice and climate change, where companies cannot just leave everything to the politicians. Their customers, their reputations are going to depend increasingly on how they behave and where they position themselves on these huge issues. So we're going to see an interplay between the new regulations, for example, on climate change, that will no doubt emerge in country after country and in region after region, and where companies are expecting to take the lead. And we're seeing, I think, more and more companies setting very ambitious targets for becoming carbon neutral, or for sourcing their supplies sustainably, or for upping their game generally on sustainability. and also companies becoming much more conscious because their feet are held to the fire on issues of social justice and the way that they behave to give opportunities to as wide a range of society as possible. So I think these increasing questions that we saw developing in 2020 are going to only intensify from the corporate perspective in 2021. My sixth theme is what you might call the tech-acceleration, the acceleration of technology. Also, I think a critical question for just about every company out there. And we've seen how the pandemic has speeded up the adoption of technologies, often trends that were there already quite strongly, such as e-commerce, even telemedicine, video conferencing, but has led to far more widespread adoption of them. And even in countries that were until now relatively laggards in this respect, suddenly there's been a surge, and in a question of a matter of 1 year, typically we've seen adoption taking place that was only expected after 5 or even 10 years, according to pre-pandemic forecasts. So the crucial question in 2021 and beyond, but especially I think as we start to emerge from the restrictions of the pandemic with vaccinations and hopefully with suppression of the virus itself, is how many of these trends stick, how much stays, how much changes, and to what extent do we simply go back to the world as it was before. And my belief is that we certainly don't go back just to the world as it was before, and probably we adopt a lot more of what has been quickly put in place during the pandemic, a lot more than we would have thought right at the outset, because simply we've got used to it, and a lot of it turns out to be highly efficient. So people are going to want to go back in many cases to physical workspaces together where you can collaborate, to be in offices, but perhaps much more flexibly than was the case in the past. Perhaps not every single day. Perhaps there'll be more options, more flexibility to mix working at home and in the office than there was before. And the technological tools that make this possible have been shown to work. And furthermore, crucially, often it's shown to be really quite productive to empower people to work in more flexible ways. So I think we'll see a mix and match depending on the industry, depending on the type of work involved. But I think we will see that a surprising amount of the habits that have started to form during the pandemic will stick, especially because we've now been doing them for some time. So they're not temporary glitches. They're in many cases habits that are deeply set in. And even in areas where it's highly desirable to go back and be physically present, education is one example. I think we've also seen that remote teaching can also work pretty well, and those tools will be part of the mix in future, much more than we would have expected perhaps until we were forced to adjust. One industry, and this is my seventh theme that has been particularly affected by the pandemic, has of course been travel and tourism, but that also rolls into travel for education, foreign students traveling around the world to have experience of education in other countries, migration of people generally, and business travelers. Now, how much of this will come back in 2021? Clearly, it's going to depend a lot on the things I talked earlier, the pace of vaccination, whether in fact we have vaccination passports of some sort that facilitate travel and how quickly that comes in, whether the geopolitical competition that I talked about between China and America also continues to suppress, for example, the Chinese student travel, which has been a huge thing in recent years, and whether companies decide that the sooner their executives can get back on the road, the better. I think those things remain to be seen. But again, I think it's a question of much harder questions being asked than in the past about whether these elements of mobility are really necessary. And that would apply particularly to business travel. I would suggest that the scrutiny of whether your trip is really necessary will be rather stronger in the future, even as travel restrictions are eased. There's going to be a great desire to go out and physically get in touch with clients again, physically have meetings, physically engage in events and conferences like this one. But I think that it will be against the background of knowing that there are alternatives and a much harder-headed look at the costs and benefits of doing it in different ways. So I think a desperate desire in many cases to get back and to have the physical interaction, to have the physical ability to move across borders and to travel far and wide, but also the constraint of saying, is your trip really necessary? And I think that will mean that this will be a rather slower return to quite apart from the constraints of health and safety, a slower return to the kinds of growth projections that we would have seen before the pandemic. My eighth theme is on the theme of climate change, and this question of, I suppose, building back better is a phrase that's bandied about a lot. That there will be a lot of focus on how green or how sustainable the recovery can be, and whether there's an opportunity here to adjust faster than would otherwise have been the case. And I think there are various forces that push in that direction. One is the new administration in America. On day one, President Biden went back into the Paris Climate Agreement, signaling that the most powerful economy in the world is going to be taking this more seriously than it has done in recent years. Secondly, there's the fact that at the end of towards the end of 2021, we do have this COP26 climate conference, which is a place where there will be pressure on country after country to set more ambitious targets for reducing carbon emissions. And the third, I suppose, pressure point is consuming power, which I think there is coming increasingly strongly, that this is what customers of businesses expect. They expect companies to show that they're behaving responsibly towards the planet. But I think the other side of this is the opportunity that there is out there. It's not just the stick, there's also the carrot, the idea that there are opportunities to take advantage of tumbling costs of renewable energy, for example, of consumer demand for sustainable products, of a selling point which can be found in setting ambitious targets, both as a way to concentrate minds within the context of a company and to motivate employees around a target which in many cases will resonate with staff and make the company the sort of company that people want to work for. So I think a combination of forces are only going to make the focus on sustainability even stronger than it has been in the past in 2021. Added to that is the leverage that governments have because of all the money they've been they've been lending. So they will have control over over the ways often in which that money is used. And a good case in point is the recovery funds in the European Union, which are in many cases being made conditional upon enough emphasis being put on building back better on the sustainability aspect and making sure that it is helping the long-term sustainability of the planet. So I think very much a big theme to watch for the year ahead is the focus on sustainability, whether it's enough to really make a meaningful difference in the climate, in the way that the world's environment is holding up. That's another matter, but I think there will be this very big emphasis on it in the year ahead. Then the ninth theme, because it's been such an extraordinary time and so much was cancelled in 2020, there's going to be a sort of sense of deja vu in 2021, where many things that were scheduled for last year actually end up happening in 2021. And whether that's, the Bond movie that was meant to be released then that should be released in 2021, or whether it's the big sporting event that was scheduled for 2020 and eventually happens in 2021, there'll be this sense that that it's take two, that what you've been gearing up for then is actually happening now. And of course, the climate conference I talked about is one case in point where it was meant to happen in 2020, but will be happening in 2021. Often rather confusingly keeping the branding of 2020, because all the marketing around, often keeping the branding that was originally for 2020 slightly confusingly. So don't be surprised to have deja vu in 2021. And then my final theme is that there is a wake-up call for the foreseeable threats that we haven't been perhaps paying enough attention to. I've talked a lot about climate change. That's the one beyond the pandemic. But given that we had a pandemic that some people had been warning about, that sooner or later was perhaps bound to happen, there is a chance in 2021 for those who would like to focus attention on obvious threats that are out there that we know about, that perhaps should be taken more seriously early on, and to get attention focused on them. And I think some of the ones that are fairly clear are to do with, for example, the trouble that we're creating in the vulnerabilities we're creating in the cybersphere, and to pay more attention to the resilience of our systems in that respect, to the problems that we're creating to some extent in space, where the question of more and more space clutter is something that we should be concerned about, and the sooner that there is an attention given to that issue, the better. And then there is one more familiar risk that has been with us for a long time, but I think will be very prominently back with us in 2021. And that is the question of weapons of mass destruction, in particular nuclear weapons. I don't get alarmed. I'm not predicting nuclear conflagration in 2021, but there is a danger, there is a risk that the controls that we've had in place now for many years, and the arms control agreements that have been in place, will give way to a new nuclear arms race. And I think that there is a growing sense of a need to refresh the arms control architecture, the arms control engagement at a strategic level, not just between the traditional big powers, Russia and America, that negotiated such agreements, but involving increasingly China, and trying to make sure that nuclear weapons don't proliferate much beyond the countries that already have them now, because if that happens, the world is going to look a much scarier and less stable space. So I don't want to leave you on a overly gloomy thought. I think that this is a particularly tough year to predict because of the pandemic, but that there is every chance that as we go through the year, from the rather difficult beginnings of lockdowns and a virus that in many parts of the world has resisted controls, that we will gradually see a sense of light at the end of the tunnel as vaccines are spread, as economic activity starts to come back in a serious and more sustained way. And that some of the opportunities that will have been revealed by the pandemic will start to become clear, more flexible working, technologies that really make a difference. We had on our cover not so long ago on The Economist, the idea of the roaring 20s, the productivity effects from the latest rounds of technology might really be starting to come through, and that we can look forward to a period of opportunities and growth if we play our cards right. So that's my hope for 2021. It's not going to be easy. It's going to be hard to navigate. I do hope that these 10 trends that I've outlined will help to give you some reference points that help you navigate the year ahead. Thank you very much.